Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Cheeky Natives. This is your boy, Hlomani. And again, like most episodes, I'm flanked by two gorgeous women. We've got Sue Nyathi, who is the author of the book we'll be discussing today called The Gold Diggers. And then we've got the lovely Dr. Slay.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm okay. I haven't slept, but I'm okay.
Is this because of the book or because of your work?
So both. Thank you to Sue for depriving me of sleep during the week. And I was working yesterday, so I haven't slept, but that's fine.
Okay, so we're recording at the wonderful bookstore Bridge Books in front of a live audience, so we're really excited about that. How are you doing, Sue?
I'm good, thanks, and thank you for inviting me onto this platform.
I mean, Alma and I both essentially spent a day reading your book.
Yeah.
I remember when Nyathi Sue was like, oh, well, good luck, you're not going to sleep tonight. I thought she was joking until I didn't sleep.
Yeah.
So just to read a bit about who Sue is for those podcast listeners who don't know, Sue Nyathi was born and raised in Bulawayo and resides in Johannesburg. An investment analyst by day and storyteller to her son at night, she writes to escape the reality of the financial markets and economic shop talk. She made her screenwriting debut on the award-winning ETV series Matatiele. Her first novel, The Polygamist, was published in 2012, and the readers can look forward to its film adaptation in 2019.
Yes. Welcome to the Cheeky Natives. We're quite excited to have you here. So as is the tradition at the Cheeky Natives, we always ask the author to read from their book.
Okay.
So for those of you who have
Your Bibles.
Please turn to chapter 1, page 1. If you don't have your Bible, I'm sure you'll be encouraged by hearing Sue read from the first page of The Gold Diggers.
Okay, cool. Here we go. Chapter 1. A gleaming white Toyota Quantum with black tinted windows pulled into a vacant parking space opposite Max's garage. Everyone in Bulawayo knew Max's garage. It wasn't just a fuel and service station. It was more like a busy transit terminal. Max's garage was the gateway out of Bulawayo to places like eSigodini, Gwanda, Beitbridge, and Johannesburg. In the same vein, it was also the entry point for those coming in from the southern parts of the country. It welcomed you into the bosom of the City of Kings, a city whose pulse was faltering as its entire body succumbed to an economic malaise. The inn's fast food franchise, located there, also ensured the place was always bustling with activity. The people who thronged there were an easy target for con artists, petty criminals, and vendors milling around.
Thank you so much, Sue. I mean, I think I initially picked this book up and thought, okay, let me just read. So this is how I test my books nowadays. I'm like, let's just read the first paragraph. And already I was like, now I want to know where this quantum is going, what is happening, who is in the quantum, like, you know. So I thought it was quite like a captivating entrance into a book. But I suppose the first question that we have for you is that, you know, if I'm walking into the room and I see this title and The Gold Diggers, the first thing that I'm thinking about is like we're going to hear a love story about gold diggers, you know. And I wanted to know why particularly did you take this cover and this title for this book?
Okay, so to start with The Gold Diggers, I mean, the story is set in Johannesburg. And if we look at the history of Johannesburg, most settlers came here during the gold rush. And that's how Johannesburg, you know, was actually built as a result of the gold rush. So it was about gold, digging for gold. But here we are in the 21st century, and we still have people coming into Johannesburg looking for gold, but it's a different kind of gold. It's not the same gold that you dig underground, but it's still, you know, they're looking for a fortune, a different kind of fortune. So for me, it was an appropriate title. Hence The Gold Diggers. So not in the sense of, you know, a blessee kind of relationship. So definitely not in that regard. And the picture, well, the cover. So in my book, I allude to Johannesburg as a woman. I mean, Cape Town is the mother city, so why can't Johannesburg be the daughter or whatever? But she's a woman, and I see her as a woman and refer to her as a woman. And so that's why we have this woman with this dress, and then you can see the towers, and, you know, just encompassing Johannesburg.
So the book is written in a very interesting writing style. And I want to know why you chose to write the book in the way that you did. You didn't write it as a first-person account. You've written it from the viewpoints of very different characters. Why did you choose to do that for this book?
Because everyone who comes to Johannesburg has a different story. It's not the same story. So I was trying to show, the different, narratives. There's no single narrative. That's why I chose that approach. And I had many different characters to show the different, viewpoints. Because I'm trying to, show these people on a journey, and it can't be one journey. Yeah. And so that was why I took that approach.
I mean, that's also quite an interesting thing, because that's what I enjoyed. It's like every person not necessarily had a chapter, but had a story.
That was unpredictable.
Yeah. So we couldn't be like, okay, this is the protagonist in the book, and they encounter these people, but essentially most people in the book were protagonists. And it's the topics that you cover in the book are very interesting. I mean, you're writing, I guess, from 2 points of view. On the one hand, it's 2018, so it's been 10 years since the major xenophobic attacks that happened in South Africa, but also like the period of 2008 was quite a tumultuous period in Zimbabwe. So do you want to talk about like how you came to, or how the story came about? Like, why was it important for you to write this in this moment?
Okay, so I actually started writing this book in 2013. Okay, and the first xenophobic attacks, I think I sort of not experienced personally, but when I first moved, I moved to Johannesburg in 2008, and then a few months later, these xenophobic attacks erupted in Alexandra Township, and there was a lot of talk on radio about xenophobia, and I used to listen on the discussions, and what always used to grab me was people would be like, "What are they doing here? Why don't they go back where they came from?" And then I said to myself, no one is worried about they. I mean, this they keeps being thrown around, and nobody seems to know who they is. So I thought, I need to give they a face, because they can't, speak up for themselves. But they is, we keep tossing it around, but who is they? And so that's how then my story, that was how this book was born. And,
so you have different characters in the book, and you've alluded to it sort of earlier about how different people have a different motivations for leaving. And I think often we think of like the single immigrant story, like you left for this particular reason. But I'm very curious about the different characters in the book, and their motivation for leaving. So Portia is a major character in the book, guys. And when you read the book, you'll see Portia's my fave, because Portia has a come up that I don't think anybody could have predicted, right? No, it's the year of the come up. We're all crazy about Ciara's come up, so I was here for Portia's come up, Just briefly, Portia in the book is a woman who comes to Joburg, like many other women whose husbands, he's a migrant laborer, so the husband's left her in Zim, and he's here. She comes here and she just finds him living his best life, and then he sends her away. But Portia is not going back to Zim. She did not make that trip for no reason, And all the characters in the story have different motivations for leaving. So I guess the question really is, why did you feel so strongly about matching those different characters with those motivations? Because Portia would have never ever imagined in a million years to have had sort of the turnaround that she has in the book. And you'll see towards the end why Portia has the best come up of everybody in the book.
I think, Portia's character is there to illustrate the determination. You know what you've left behind. You come here and you can't afford to fail. You just, it's make it or it breaks you. It's a do or die kind of situation. And I just wanted to illustrate, a lot, that sort of determination in immigrants who come here, and the desperation, because if I leave here, it's like better the unknown than what I know. It's that sort of feeling like I'll have to try and make it work. It has to work.
So you've been in Joburg for 10 years. You've been here since 2008, right? And you started writing the book in 2013. After the success, you've had the Polygamist come out and it's done well as well. But I'm really curious as to how, because I mean, just having read about what you do, and I think that your life story is a little bit different to the people that you've written about. Your experience is different to the people that you've written about in the book, right? And I'm curious as to how being an immigrant informed the writing process of this book, outside of you wanting to humanize the people that had obviously been dehumanized in the 2008 xenophobic attacks.
Okay, so look, like you say, I came in 2008, but my journey was different because I got a permit and I came here, and you have the permission to look for work. So it was a legal passage. And, luckily for me, my brothers were already here. So it's, I had a place to arrive to. And sort of, they looked after me whilst, I went through the journey of looking for a job. But, that's not the case for the majority of people. The permit people is just a small portion, and it's a more privileged, sort of route. But that doesn't mean because of my privilege, I can't empathize. And because I have lots of cousins and relatives who've come here, illegally, okay? And I fraternize with them. I know them. I know, they struggle. So it's not like it's a distant, sort of experience from me. It's a close experience. But like most illegal people, they don't have a voice. You can't really stand up and say, listen, this is my journey. Next thing, you're going to be arrested and, deported. And unfortunately, that's how the story ends. So I felt like, I had to show that side, the different sides, okay, the different journeys of people coming in. Your Dumisani, although he's a professional, he doesn't have the right papers still. And you get a lot of professionals who don't have the right paperwork, but, they need to come in. So everyone is a different angle. And Portia's angle is interesting because my grandfather used to work in the mines here. And my grandmother used to live in Zim. And most mine workers couldn't go home like every year. They probably would go every 2 years. So you'd come home, grandpa comes home, my granny's there, he's there over Christmas, gets her pregnant and he's gone. Comes back, the child is 3, it's 3. And it's that back and forth. And for me, what's interesting is that back and forth still hasn't changed. That's why Portia's story is very important. Because you still have the same thing, husband away. Moms stays with the kids, they grow up without a father. And it's that back and forth, you don't have a relationship. So that's why I'm saying it was important to give each side every of each of that, the migration.
So it's interesting because I think in some ways, so the setting is obviously, as you've heard, in the taxi. And we meet all these people who are journeying to Zimbabwe in this taxi. There's a variety of them. But you also touch on a very important thing. So Melusi, who is the driver of the taxi, hears the twins speak in Shona. And it's like, you can't speak Shona in my taxi. So you touch. It's also subtly touching on the tribalism that happens in Zimbabwe, particularly, not necessarily, most of the times we hear it from the Shona towards the Ndebele side of people, but we don't necessarily hear it from the other way around. Why was it important for you to, subtly, because it's not a prevalent topic that you deal with in the book, but you certainly deal with the tribalism. Why was it important to do
it's another motivation why Ndebele people have left Zimbabwe. It's because they couldn't get jobs. Opportunities were not open to them. So they've come across the border because they couldn't access those opportunities in their own country. So that's another reason. I'm trying to explain why people are coming. They're also marginalized. So that's another impetus for them to come across.
You spoke about Dumisani, and Dumisani for me was an interesting character, right? Because Dumisani comes to Joburg and lives with his uncle, right? And he's really one of those people you speak about. I find that in your book there's a lot of determination about people, these migrant stories who are coming and working really hard. So Dumisani initially starts working as a waiter and then works himself up and he becomes like a CEO of a big investment company. But Dumisani left a wife and 2 children in Zimbabwe. And Dumisani leaves this wife and children. Dumisani then gets into this altercation with his uncle. He swung off a balcony of a building in Hillbrow. He lands up in hospital. And the wife is like obviously concerned because she's trying to provide for the family because that's what Dumisani was going to do. And she says, I'm going to do some things. She tries to do something. Dumisani in his sick bed in the hospital is patriarchal. He's like, no woman of mine will do that. If you go, you're going to do that. But while he's busy fraternizing.
He's a problematic thing. He's problematic.
So I wanted to know, why was it important for you to write Dumisani's story in the way that you did? Because I think there's a lot of things that Dumisani is doing. Initially, we see him as this determined person who's really faithful to his family and is important to his family. But as time goes by, we see maybe the weakness of the flesh takes over Dumisani.
I think he was in a hard place, and he's also been struggling, along, and things are not working out the way they should be. But I mean, if you look at his character from the word go, he was always the family man. I'm taking care of. And he's always about taking care of his family. So why would that suddenly change? And I think, when Christine suddenly says, I'm going to do this, maybe let me try. And then he's like, no, but you're emasculating me,
because masculinity is so fragile, it's the only thing that can be emasculated,
So, that led to the relationship breaking up, because a lot of times, a lot of women did take the reins in Zimbabwe and say, look, I'm going to try and, feed the family. But marriages were broken as a result because people weren't ready for women taking over.
Even though unconsciously women had been doing that all the time. So, I mean, the idea that he was in South Africa this whole time, his wife had just had a newborn, she was pregnant and then she had a newborn, and she was keeping the family going. So, as much as he wanted to be like, I am the man of this household, you have no idea about the daily runnings of this household that you're supposed to be the head of, right? You're all the way in South Africa. You're sometimes working, not working, And I mean, for me, it was also just important to have, it sparked an important conversation about masculinity and the ways in which black men continue to define themselves. And outside of their relationships with women. So if he didn't have Christine to be, the one that submits to him and the one that he provides for, would he have still had the identity that he held on so tightly to when he came to South Africa? Because he came here, didn't have that identity anymore, and he started to behave out of character, But I also do think that some of the things that happened to Dumisani are just divine justice. I called the cloth on Nolan. You'll see in the story, there's some things that happened to him. Falling off the balcony is just the beginning. But there are things that happened to him, and I'm just like, this is divine justice. Because the story of Christine is also interesting, right? Because we never hear about the wives of these migrant laborers. We have long conversations about how the migrant labor system all over the continent has ruined families, but we think about it in terms of men, that men are separated from their families, and we never have a discussion about women and the things that women have to do, I mean, having someone who comes every 3 years to impregnate you, leave you with this child, and then expect you to provide and keep the family running, right? Because when he comes home, the house must be great because he sends money home, right? But he has no concept of how much it costs to keep things going, And I thought it was really interesting that she gave a voice to the migrant laborer's wife, because that's not a voice you often hear. Speaking of voices and language and the like, there's some interesting words that get used in the book, right? And words that are just potentially, offensive just in everyday speech, So, I mean, I still recoil when I hear the word gwere because it's just such a violent and loaded word, But there's a scene that describes sort of, and we were going to ask if you were paying homage to the xenophobic attacks that happened in 2008, And so for me, the question really is about language use. Why did you choose to use the words that you did, that carry so much potency? I mean, like prostitution.
Yeah, I mean, linked to that.
Like prostitutes, Because I mean, when I hear prostitute, I'm still like you.
No, but I think to start off with prostitutes, I think you need to put it in the context. It was 2008. People weren't woke then, And I can't suddenly be using sex worker because we weren't using that word then. So I have to be true to the time.
Moment.
Otherwise.
But also, I think I wanted to know particularly why you used it, but I think it was also the injury that the word carries, right?
Yes.
So we tend to, dehumanize women by using the word
Yeah.
prostitute. Like
Slides,
there's like a certain
no respect.
potency.
Yes.
Where, as you say, sex worker, you legitimizing what is happening, right?
But it also shows how far we've come, right?
Yes.
That in 2008, I would have read this book and been like, oh, okay, cool, keep it moving. But in 2018, I'm like very aware of the potency that words carry, because words aren't innocuous, right? And I mean, we think of what happened in 2008 and how that started, that you dehumanize these people. So you call immigrants, you call them amakwere, you call them all these violent words, you know, you call them thieves, you say they're stealing your jobs, because it makes it so
Stealing
much
your woman.
easier to...
Because women are property that can be stolen.
To enact that kind of violence against them. Speaking about characters and
Yes,
violence.
I need to speak about my favorite character was Chimo, like Chenai's brother.
Or Chamunorwa.
I'm still very upset.
Chamora
with
was
you.
like, guys.
You didn't have
Chamora
to do it like that.
basically the love of my life. I was like, here's this man. He comes from Zimbabwe, where like they ran away because something bad had happened to the sister. So they come. Oh, they did something bad. Ultimately,
depends who you ask.
So
was that bad, really?
Divine justice. So they come to South Africa.
Yeah.
They stay with the mom. Things don't necessarily work out with the mom, and then he picks himself up. He gets a job. He walks these long distances. He encounters another particular violence, which I think is linked to his sister, right? So he's protective of that because he knows what happened to his sister. Takes up this woman who then is pregnant, not with his child. They live together, and I'm just like, oh, guys. Dumisani is getting out of hospital. He's like, Dumisani, we don't have much, but you can stay with us. I'm like, where is this man from? Like, I want to be his friend. And then something really tragic happens to him, right? And when I was reading that part, I was reminded of the Mozambican man who was burnt in Alex, right? And I was wondering, when you wrote the character, and particularly when you wrote that scene, was that paying homage to that particular incident?
It was, because the thing is, we don't know about him, where he had come from, what aspirations he had. And he could have been easily a Chamunorwa, just trying to also, hustle and make a life for himself. And I think once you put a face, it touches you more. The next person who gets burnt, you think about them as more than just a statistics. You think, okay, this guy probably had, you don't know about him, but I'm sort of like, try to think beyond the newspaper headline, about him.
Speaking about just thinking beyond, you write about domestic workers in this book, and they are just so funny. And I think it was interesting because you know that you have a helper, at home, because now we don't call them maids anymore. Yeah. Thank goodness that we've moved past calling our employees maid servants. But we don't think often about our helpers. So yes, you know that there's somebody's mother or that there's somebody's sister or someone, but you don't think about the backstory, and you don't think about the ways in which that separation creates a rift, in their own families. So the mother of the twins that are left in Zim while she's in South Africa, raising this white family's children, and bonding with them, and then these children come and there's such a massive rift in between that. And I'm curious as to why you wanted to explore those relationships, right? Because you really gave a face to those domestic workers, because you just think it's, you see them in Santon, sometimes walking their employers' dogs,
I was thinking about Hurlingham in particular, because like when I read the scene, I saw them. I was like, I know who they are. They always meet at like a park when the children are playing, and then they start telling their stories. So why was it important for you to, because it isn't necessarily about, Sibongile, the mother, was the migrant, but the other women are South Africans. So why was it important to write that particular story?
Because, for starters, because a lot of domestic women who come here are separated from their kids. They can't come onto the job with their children. It doesn't allow for that. So you're obviously going to have that rift as well. If you go home maybe once a year, how do you grow, have a relationship with your kids? And in Swangile's case, she never went back. So so you have these years that of being apart that you can't account for. And so the interaction is, because I'm trying to show that when you come into another country, you're not isolated. You have to integrate. You socialize with people in that country. And Uswangile is at that level. She's also socializing with other, domestic workers at, her level.
Yeah.
So, and socially, there's a social interaction.
I particularly enjoyed, there is a line where the white woman, so Portia becomes the it girl, so she's going to these book clubs and they're talking about a particular book, and it's obviously in a setting with other white women and other prominent pictures. And it was just there was an interesting, funny way of writing about white women that I enjoyed, because I was like, because I know them, I know this is how we would discuss a book. Why was it important for you to also write about these spaces, the upward mobility that black women inhabit and how they need to sort of change themselves? What I did like about Portia though is that, at some point she was like, y'all, I gotta cook for my husband. Then people were like, but you have helpers for that. She's like, no, my husband doesn't eat food made by anyone else but me.
But also, to add to that, it was an interesting example of code switching, right? Because these are upwardly mobile black women. You hang around with your white friends and you are in a book club and you read these books and you have the help to cook for your husband, But you still have to go home. Like Nomfundo goes home to Soweto and she must still deal with all of the black tags and that drama, that come with our history, And I'm just curious as to that whole juxtaposition, because we see the code switching, we see them be upwardly mobile, and it's like you see these women straddling these two very, very different worlds.
Yeah, because I also wanted to demonstrate it's not just one social layer. Like the domestic workers is one, and it's at the lowest, end of the rank. And then there's that upper layer as well. So I also wanted to show it's not, the different layers in society. And, Portia had managed to go to the top.
But Nomfundo and Dumisani's relationship and the baggage that they bring into the relationship is a lot for me.
Dumisani really got what was coming to him.
Because Nomfundo is going through a lot. Nomonde goes through a lot. Like, she's in this lush, house, but she has a family in Soweto. And like many of us, guys, black text is at home, and we need to dig into that black text. And her black text is hard because it's the mother who wants to wear designer.
It's the uncle that everybody has. That problematic uncle who's never going to move out of your granny's house. Like, he's waiting for everyone to die so that this house becomes his, right? And it was funny because also I think it was nice that Nomonde was multi-layered, right? We often think of women in these spaces as having just made it. You think if you wake up in Hurlingham and you wake up to do Pilates, you've made it. You just don't have the problems that other black people have, but you do, and sometimes it's exacerbated, right? Because now you're feeding your uncle, your uncle's children, your sister, your sister's children, your mom,
your own child
But also, I also found it interesting because some of that stuff was just a very black experience. Like when her mom comments on her weights, right? No one comments more on your weight than black people. Like, ever. Whether it's work, it's at home, it's at church, gain 5 kilograms, and there will be that aunt who's like, hi, unonile. And you're just like, what is this, And Nomonde experiences that, as upwardly mobile and as made as Nomonde is, she's not exempt from the everyday struggles of black life. Nomonde is going through it.
I want to talk about a more serious topic that you speak about and you explore in the book is trauma and the effects of how trauma plays itself out in people's lives, right? So Chenai has a very traumatic experience and that will scar her for life, right? And we see how that trauma happens again because, she tries to get out of the situation. She enters the madam's house, puts on the madam's beautiful gowns, let's just insert Aretha, beautiful gowns, wonderful gowns. And then she experiences this trauma again. And from there on, she keeps seeing the face of trauma, wherever she goes. And I wanted to know, journeying with her was where she ultimately ended up, because, she makes it, but then things
She
happen.
can't escape the
Things
story.
happen.
Yes.
Things happen, right? And I wanted to know, is that what you're trying to do? Like, because things were working out for her, right? She had gotten this big contract. She was fine. But I also, it's that photographer. That photographer.
No, but I also think if you have unresolved issues, and she never actually resolved her trauma, and it was always there, to pull her back, sort of to remind her, it's like, where you came from, kind of thing. And that whole story of Chenai, I mean, if you think about it, she was always an empty cup. She throughout, she's this empty person, and so her end, I think, is fitting for, even though she had, it's like, because she had unresolved issues, and it just, just carried, followed her.
And
throughout the book.
it's an interesting commentary because nobody ever wants to find out what Chenai's problem is, People see her behaving out of character and just being strange, but no one ever says, Chenai, why are you the way that you are? And I think it's such an interesting commentary because we know a lot of scarred and traumatized people, but everybody accepts that, oh, this person is just messed up and leaves it at that. There's never any sort of deep introspection as to why this person is the way that they are, or what happens to them, or...
But our culture also doesn't allow that indulgence into, if you're sad, no one, they're like, oh, you're moody, get over it. No one ever takes the time to be like, okay, what is the deeper underlying issue? I mean, if you think of Christine, she had depression, but you also are supposed to get on with it, So it's that thing of we never deal with things. You just get on, move on. And
Christine's cousin... It's just like basically you just need to have sex to fix it, my sister. Yeah. Sex is the problem. You're not having enough of it, So we don't. It's true. We don't actually deeply talk about people like this is a mental health issue. Maybe you should get some professional help. Yeah. We're just like, you're not praying enough. Go to church, pray, or like just get over it.
Like, why are you unhappy? Because you have all of these things. Why are you unhappy? And I think you also touched on a very interesting topic as to how, even as a community, we perpetuate women staying in situations that are not good or healthy for them, So Nomonde says that she's unhappy. There's all of this drama happening with Dumisani, but her family's intrinsic reaction is to be like, oh, but he's bringing in the money, so stay with him. Why would you leave him? Begezela, And I thought that just reading this during Women's Month was very interesting because of the ways in which our community continuously sort of harms women, was that a conscious doing on your part?
Yeah, because if you think of the way we raised, it's always grin and bear it. Look at the bigger picture, what you feeling, inside, try and resolve it. But what's the bigger picture? Big home, you're provided for. Just keep it moving.
So there are two. I want to call them minor characters in the play, but for me, they stuck with me throughout the play. The one character is Gugulethu. So Gugu has to meet her mother. Something unfortunate happens to the family, so they can't actually get to the child in time. Melusi and... what is his name?
Give more.
Yeah. Give more. Give more. Give more sells Ugugu to this Chinese man in child trafficking, right? And Gugu stays with me throughout the story because I'm like, guys, what's happening to Gugu, right? But also related to that is the women that we encounter. Give more's girlfriend, that when they are journeying here, she's taken away. Utuli is taken away by the bandits. Yes, and she's just gone. And like I kept wondering what happened to these women. But I think it's also talking about like the very important story of like sex and child trafficking. Like someone goes missing and we really never actually get the time to find out what happened to this person. But luckily for Gugu, we find her again, and I'm like, oh my gosh, thank you, Gugu, because she was really like plaguing me. Was that deliberate on your part to, hold her there and then bring her up?
Yeah. It was. And a lot of people, I saw a comment where they said, it's incomplete. I mean, what happened to Tuli? I mean, I think it doesn't need to be complete. There are girls who go missing, and you don't know where they are. And you never know where they are. You never get the closure. It's the same as that Malaysian airline that sank. It still hasn't been found. Can you imagine, those families don't know what happened to those people. And I just wanted to say, sometimes in life, there are people who disappear and you just don't know what happened to them. And it's a haunting feeling because it's always like, but what happened, and so that was deliberate.
I mean, talking about Malaysia, we've got our sister who has to traffic drugs.
Oh, Ulindani.
Oh.
Wow, but I was curious about that, right? Because there are all these stereotypes that exist about who traffics drugs and who's responsible for the drug trafficking, and that also feeds into the people's excuses for xenophobia, right? So I'm curious as to why you chose to write that in the way that you did, when a lot of the book has been about sort of debunking stereotypes or giving an alternative view to these stereotypes that exist.
No, because sometimes there is truth to the stereotypes. So I also can't, there are Zimbabwean criminals in South Africa, and it's been documented. So it's not, some immigrants are not totally innocent. So I also couldn't have a view of painting them as innocent. That also would have been not true, there are bad people who come into this country. And you saw uncle, Dumisani's uncle was one of them, and that's also another side of it, that although it may make people uncomfortable, but it's something we have to come, to terms with.
I mean, but that man, Oluwaga Lintani, didn't do her right though. Wow, guys. No, like just to, but it's, we like things too much because she was enjoying that life at Michelangelo, and it's like, oh baby, I'm taking on a trip to.
But who doesn't like nice things?
To London. She goes to London.
I'm so confused.
When she gets to London, how?
Right? Like, who doesn't like nice things? I'm trying to understand this criticism. Like, if you call me and you like my friend, let's go to London, I'm going to be like, yo, wrong. I'm going to be like,
sis,
my friend loves me. He's taking me to London, right? But also, I mean, it's also this exploitation of vulnerability. Like, so you can say, oh, this sounds a bit dodgy. Why is this trip free? How's this visa working? You can ask those kind of questions. But if you're in the kind of position where you're totally reliant on somebody, you're not going to be asking questions about where the money came from, why the money is now suddenly coming to you, why this is being expected of you, right? And it speaks to, for me, it was an exploration of unequal power dynamics, right? And the fact that certain men know how to prey on vulnerable women, right? He knew how to find a Lindani. He knew where to locate Lindani. And the fact is, people knew that this person was problematic because at the salon, Lindani was warned. People were like, hey, this guy is bad news. And she was just like, they're jealous, they want my mans.
She was like, I'll make my own mistakes. I'm like, sharp girl, make your own mistakes.
And for me, I was just curious, right? In writing that relationship, what were you thinking about when you wrote that relationship and that scene and how things ended for Lindani?
So you have Uken as the Nigerian, and we've all heard the story of Nigerian drug dealers, and so it was trying to bring that, and that's why I had Christine's cousin. She's married to a Nigerian, but he's a doctor and he's a good guy. So just to show that, so that there are good and bad, like in most, societies. So it was that good and the bad. And Ulindani was desperate. I mean, look, initially she didn't want to be with Ken, but it was also after Givemore, her little drama, she was also forced. She was forced into it, and she was trying to get out. She was like, this is the last trip kind of thing. And I know it's
this is the last trip. I mean, carrying someone's baby is the last trip. Nah.
So people are naive as well. They always think, okay, people are true to their word, and they're not. I mean, Ken was consistently evil throughout. I mean, scruples, it was like.
So for me, what was interesting is, like, obviously we start this scene with the taxi and we want to know who the driver is, right? And we get to know who the driver is, Umelusi. And, now I'm like, on the one hand, I'm like, babes, you're doing a good job because people can come, And then on the other hand, I'm like, but also how much money are you getting throughout these trips? Like, what are you trying to do? And we then see Givemore ultimately leave this situation because it's like, I'm not making enough money, and goes to the uncle. And then something also tragic happens to Melusi, right? And I'm like, but wow, how are people going to travel now?
They are the Melusis. They're not like,
But for me, I think sometimes we think about the immigrant experience has often been painted in a very one-dimensional way, right? So you see the successful immigrants who left home and comes here and becomes a doctor or becomes, those are the success stories that we hear about constantly. But we never hear about the other rags to riches stories. So I mean, when you're a Malusi and you start from nothing and you make this lucrative business, which is also illegal, I mean, you are successful in your own right, but the basis of those riches is a little bit questionable,
Dubious.
Yeah, it's just a little bit dubious when you're selling children into trafficking, And I want to know why you explored that whole rags to riches, because it comes up often in the book. Everybody gets their come up. The come up just looks different for everybody.
You see, the whole thing about when you go into another country as an immigrant, there's an expectation. You left, the pit. You need to come up. You need to do better. And the reason why some people don't ever go back is because they always feel like they'll be stigmatized because they didn't make it. So there's pressure. There's always pressure, and the pressure comes. You also have to look after people that you left behind. So even if you get a job, the salary you earn is just not. It's not only for you. You need to send money back home. You need to take care of people. You also need to try and look like you have a life here as well. Because when people come here, they're like, but she left them to do what here? She's not in Daneford. She's still, there's pressure all the time. So you always have like one leg here, one leg, and you're never quite anywhere.
I felt that in this book you were working through your own feelings about Zimbabwe and about home and about just having to immigrate and come to South Africa. Have you come to some sort of resolution in writing this book? How do you feel now? What are your feelings?
So I think when Portia leaves, like a lot of what Portia went through is what I went through. I remember when I made the decision to leave. I remember sitting at home. I had moved back home, and I was 28 at the time. I'd moved back home because I couldn't afford to live, on my own. And I'm 28, and I'm thinking to myself, and I was now lecturing at the university at that time. And I used to get the salary, which I'd have to go and convert on the black market on the same day because it would lose value the next day. And it would, be worth half of what it was. And I used to get a lot of, True Love magazines, the old editions and stuff. And I would see what other women my age were doing. And I was thinking to myself, but surely this can't be it. Is this the rest, is this going to be the rest of my life, And so I thought, no, there has to be something better out there. And so that sort of prompted my decision. And in the same way, when Portia she's in this rural area and she's like, is this it? That's the same kind of feeling. So that I was, also projecting what I kind of went through. Yeah, so sometimes throughout the book, some of those challenges would also have been something that I've also had to grapple with. But I don't think, I've reached any resolution. It's difficult because, my son was born here, and I was just thinking, someone asked this question, like, would you want to be buried here? And I was like, no, I wouldn't, because I don't have that kind of kinship to this country. I would want my body repatriated. But my son has grown up here, and it might be a different kind of answer from him, in terms of, and maybe he might not feel any kinship, to Zim, because this is all he's ever known. So you see, so there's always that. You here, but I still have family back home. So I'm never quite here. There's always you feel torn, and it's always it's like you're always being pulled, and it doesn't stop. And I think that's the difficult, because at times you're like, okay, I would love to actually go away somewhere for Christmas, but then I think I haven't seen my parents all year. You can't. It's not easy to get time off in between, and you end up having to go home. But you would have liked to have gone somewhere. Do you see what I'm saying? Your life is always like all the time, and yeah.
I mean, for me, an interesting thing is that so you start, there are parts to the book, and every part of the book starts with a Bible scripture, and I was really intrigued by the decision to do that. Like, why was it important for you to start, let's say, for instance, part 1 with a scripture from Exodus? Like, why was it important to use the biblical scriptures to, I guess, epitomize what the part of the book was going to deal with?
Because I felt it was an exodus of Zimbabweans, and for me that was the sort of the best reflection of that. Your pharaoh could have been Gabi because it was during his time. So it was just that I just felt it was it just captured it, beautifully, that whole movement. And when the Exodus, it's just, I don't know, it was just, for me, it just worked.
So we often ask authors this about their books. So if you met a stranger on the Gautrain, for example, and you get talking, and because this is Joburg, they ask you what you do. And you say, oh, I've written a book. And they say, what is your book about? How would you describe your book to a stranger?
I'd say my book is essentially a journey that follows six immigrants from the time they leave Bulawayo to the time they arrive in Johannesburg, and it just explores, the paths they take towards trying to find the gold in the city.
I mean, it's interesting because you have a master's degree in finance. You're a financial analyst. How do you use writing as a way to escape I want to say mundane because, those type of jobs, for me, I feel like mundane. Do you use writing to escape the mundane of the work that you do?
Yeah, look, I've always been a writer. I mean, from the time I was 8, I was really scribbling. So I knew I wanted to write. If there was anything I knew in life, it was I wanted to write. Everything else just happened. But
so you just happened to have a master's in finance?
No. It was circumstantial in terms of, at the time when I wanted to go to university, there was no tertiary institution that offered journalism, only literary course. So I was kind of forced. It was like a decision, you're going to go to this university, pick. And so I was like, finance seems interesting. I hated accounting. I didn't want to do marketing, So it was that kind of choice. It wasn't like driven by anything. And so even though I did that, I never stopped writing. I always used to write in the background. So even when I started my first job, the writing never stopped. So, so it's, for me, it's like an escape, Yeah.
So this is your second book. You've written your first book, which is The Polygamist, which did really, really well. And now you've written The Gold Diggers. Can you see a difference in the journey, having had your first book, and you're saying, how do you feel you've grown as a writer from that first book to now?
Well, people have told me I've matured as a writer, from the first book, which I think is a great compliment. I didn't think about it, okay, I think I've matured. So I've just been told, and I think that's it's great, because I think you want to grow as a writer. And I mean, the Polygamist and this book are very different.
Yeah.
I remember this girl on Twitter described, she says, The Gold Diggers is like eating a 3-course meal, whereas The Polygamist is like a yummy dessert. That's
a yummy dessert.
Yeah. It's an interesting description. So, yeah, they're two different books, but I think they both serve their purpose.
Did you feel any pressure writing The Gold Diggers? I mean, with the success of The Polygamist and how much everybody enjoyed it, did you feel pressure with this book?
I did, because I always felt I'm going to be compared. They're going to compare it to The Polygamist. So there's always that pressure that if you bomb, I mean, it's like, no, it is, the pressure is real. It's like when you release your first album and it goes platinum. The second one, people still want the same. It has to be
the standard.
You must maintain. So there is pressure. So I won't lie, it was always there. And I'm glad I'm it's out of the way now, because now I can breathe, and I think there's no more pressure going forward. So.
I mean, we're a literary podcast, so it would be remiss of us, obviously, to not ask you, who are some of your favorite writers? Some of the people that you also spend one day reading. It could be other South African or Southern African women that you've really drawn inspiration from, or a book that you just return to often.
There's so many. I've read so many books. And it's always a tough question, because different books, bring different things to you, and you take different things from different books. And I think I've started reading a lot of African literature. I think in the past 3 years. And that genre is, I know it's not politically correct to call it a genre, but that African literature is growing, and there's a lot of stuff coming up from that, and so I've started to read a lot from there. I mean, look, I read The Ones with Purpose, which I thought was a beautiful book.
Yeah, we agree.
Yeah.
We're just like, everyone should read The Ones with Purpose.
Yeah. But right now, yeah, so I'm sticking to reading writers on the continent, and that's deliberate because when I grew up, I read a lot of American and European writers, and that was largely because that's what was available.
Yeah.
And that influenced my decision when I started writing. You know, initially I started writing with white characters, and I thought, you know what? Why don't you write
people you know?
Yeah, write what you know, and I think that's, you know, any advice for anyone who wants to write what you know. And so then I started writing, you know, with black characters as the main characters, and that's, you know, how it sort of it grew. So I've had a lot of, like, I would say, writers that have influenced me, and some are not really, you know, like you have Jane Austen. I like her. Pride and Prejudice. That book really, that classic, which I'm trying to sort of, I've always wanted to do something modern on that. The classic, yeah. Jane Austen, I like. Martina Cole, I know it's a weird choice, but I love how she writes, that dramatic style. Yeah. And I think when people say I'm bold as well, I think, you know, she showed me that you could actually take it there, you know, so without being afraid. Then there was Jean M. Ale. She wrote the Earth Children series. I don't know if you probably know it. It's like it's called the Earth Children series. It's like a series, sort of. It's based like during prehistoric times, but I love kind of that historical, being able to imagine something out of your realm, and she does that very well. So those are some of, you know, and then of course Sidney Sheldon. I used to read a lot. I mean, you know, that was the end. Yeah, and I liked the pace, and so you see it in my book as well. You know that I also have that pace. You know, so you sort of take, you know, different things from different writers. You know, and yeah.
So
and yeah, Bettina Gappa as well. I like. She's also I like her, and she does the short stories.
Yes,
she's a brilliant short story writer. I think short story writing is very difficult, but
some people just have a knack for it.
Yeah, and they can.
I mean, when I think about short stories, I'm thinking about, like, you know, women like Mama Miriam Tladi and Bessie Head, just like punchy when you read. You're just engulfed in that story. And then you think about other people, like, you know, for instance, writers like Chimamanda have written novels and short stories, and I found her novel work to be more punchy than her short stories, because I felt there was always more. But because it might also be because I've read her as a novelist, so I'm like, girl, like, I want more.
Yeah, no, like the Purple Hibiscus, that probably was it's my best book from her. I don't, you know.
Mine is Half of a Yellow Sun.
Mine as well. Half of a Yellow Sun.
For me, that book just did it for me, and even now it just it stays with me.
It's interesting that, just as a tangent, that Americana is consistently at the bottom of the like. It does. We all fight over like Purple Hibiscus and Half of the Yellow Sun, but we can all agree, with, you know what, Americana we can put there just right at the bottom, you know. So we want to know what's next for Sue. So we know that you have a screenplay out for.
We also think that this should be a screenplay.
This would be such a great movie, right?
Yeah.
There's a screenplay out of The Polygamist.
It'll come out next year. Yeah. I think they've started with the auditions. They're doing the casting at the moment. Okay. So that's still going ahead.
Cool. And how involved are you with the movie?
I'm sure. I don't know if I mean, I think when we did all the paperwork, there is, you know, room for me to get involved creatively in terms of, you know, giving creative direction. And I have got sight of the first draft of the script. Yeah. You know, I mean, they have been saying to me, like, comments and stuff. Yeah. So, yeah, so I have some input into it, you know.
But I suppose, on the other hand, you want to see how it's adapted, right? So you don't want to be too involved. Yeah. You want to be like, okay, let's see how people interpret The Polygamist.
Yeah, because, I mean, look, I wrote the book. Yeah. Let someone else
do something.
Whatever. I mean, you can't always be Bambazonke. You know, it's nice to actually see what other people can do with your work. Yeah, and so people have also, like you were saying the gold diggers would actually make a great...
Sure.
Yeah. So I don't know if that will become a movie or a series. I don't know. But
If there are any screen situations here, please.
Yeah.
Sue is ready for this. I guess now we're going to open up for 1 or 2 questions, and then we're going to, obviously apportion you some land as we do at the Cheeky Natives. Is there anyone who has a question?
Ladies in the back, I know
Feel
you were
free,
very
yeah.
eager with your books. Don't be shy. This is a safe space.
You covered everything. You understand the
Oh.
conversations that you have had during the conversation, so everything is covered.
We'll even take comments.
yeah, if you have comments.
Any comments?
Shall I?
Yes.
I have a question just about polygamist being into the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So I hear you saying you don't want to be Bambazonke and everyone is always
Mm-hmm.
But I also find that I always get so scared when we're gonna turn the novel into a movie, and I always wonder what the author has said. Like for instance, maybe Halfway Other Son, they missed the whole point of the book. I mean, the picture is nice, but it didn't capture it. So as much as you're gonna kind of maybe take a backseat, are you gonna try at least get across the point of your vision in the movie, or you don't mind if we just come?
It's difficult because how someone interprets your work is not, you might want, and what you might feel you have an emphasis on, they might not feel as important. That's the difference, I think, with film and what, filmmakers decide they want to put an emphasis on. So, and the thing is, having actually done a bit of screenwriting, it's hard to put the whole book into 60 minutes, or is it 120? Yeah, imagine trying to fit it with when we write, we have that leisure because we're not restricted to time, and they are. So I've learned, if they decide to cut things out, I'm not emotional about it anymore. Even if they don't capture, it's what they feel. The book is still there. I always say the book will always be the book.
Yeah.
If they decide to butcher it, it's their prerogative.
Moral of this story: read the book.
Yeah.
Yes, there's one question at the back and another one here.
No, not a question so much, but a comment. So I think one of my favorite characters in the book was Christine.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's a bit strange, but I think what I liked about her was consistently throughout the book, she was comfortable being herself. So she was comfortable making a decision and sticking to it. Because even when Dumisani was pursuing her, she consistently said no until she was ready to say yes. And she only was ready to say yes when the situation was comfortable enough to accommodate someone else. And I think when you contrast that to Portia, for example, who got pregnant and then she had to drop out of school and get married, and then she says, if I had been educated, it would have been easier for me to leave or to at least stay and find a job, because then I know that I'm educated, I can do something else with my time. But then she felt compelled to leave and go find her husband because there weren't that many options available to her. So I like that about Christine, that she was her own person. So even the minute, because even the whole visa thing, it was an option, but she didn't take it until she was comfortable enough to take it. Until she was ready to say, okay, you know what, I am actually ready now to move to the UK and to do this nursing thing and find a job there and work so I can be able to support my kids and my mother. So that in that aspect, I found her to be one of my favorite characters in the book.
That's nice.
That's
Yeah.
very
Yeah,
interesting.
that's very nice. Yes.
So you said you started writing the book in 2013, right? And then you wrote it during the era of Robert Mugabe. Have you ever thought of writing maybe a continuous book, knowing that there's a new president now, the newly elected president, which is
No, you mean like a sequel? No.
Yeah, mostly.
No.
Okay.
No. There will be no sequel, but I'm very sure about that. But what I want to do, I would definitely love to write about the post-Mugabe era, and that will be in another book. Definitely not. Yeah, that's definitely on the cards. I definitely want to do that era of the generals. I think it will make a nice read. Yeah.
Yes.
Mine is a comment too. For me, the book more like spoke the same. I've been part of that life.
My maternal grandfather is from Zimbabwe, and we live in Alex. We actually grew up in Alex. And during that period when people were coming in, we did have relatives from Zimbabwe coming into Alex in the 90s already.
Yes.
They're living around town. Some live in the Dane funds as well.
Yes.
Some were legal, some were not. But as you go through the book, then the question would be, I wonder what my granddad's journey was before he, like from that taxi until he got into town. And during the 2008 xenophobic era, we were like, where do we then take the ones that still live in Alex? Because our neighbors know, people that we share our space with know that there's people in the house. And you can imagine the little matchbox house in Alex, but it was like many of us. But if you think about when this the mother of the twins. At some point, in essence, there was that kind of course, these kids are my kids anyway. So it gets to that. You would see this family that was scattered getting back together at some point.
I think from the Cheeky Native Sue, we want to say that this was absolutely a riveting, important, and necessary book. I want to not compare it, but put it alongside Half of a Yellow Sun. We speak a lot about the Biafran War, or even under the idolatries. So we speak about the Biafran War, but it's from a historical perspective, but we don't talk about the lives of the people who were affected by things such as war. And in this particular Gold Diggers, about what happened when the economic crisis happened in Zimbabwe. We don't speak about the lives of these people. And even when the xenophobic attacks happened in South Africa, and they haven't happened once, they've happened many times, right? That there are people who have lives, who come from families, who had dreams, who had aspirations. And I think this is what the book really does. So we absolutely had a wonderful time reading it. Like, I mean, literally in a day, you were done. You were just like,
It's not fair, considering it took me 3 years to write.
I think on the one hand it speaks, it speaks about the fact that it was a real page turner. You know, some books you can put down, go back to it, but this was like, oh my gosh, I want to know what happens to these people, you know.
And also to add to that these are life experiences that are not necessarily in any way related to yours. You know, even if you've never been an immigrant or you've never left your home country, you were sitting here reading this book and thinking about your own politics and thinking about the own ways in which you are problematic, right? Because you read Chamunorwa's story, right? And you're like, oh my goodness, I encounter people like him every single day, but I've never thought about what the journey is behind the Zimbabwean waiter at the restaurant that you go to. You never think about...
And that you're sometimes rude to.
That you're sometimes rude to because you're having a bad day, you're tired, you don't care, they got your order wrong, but you have no concept or no thinking behind the backstory, right? And it's this idea that there isn't a single story that exists, right? That when we talk about these success stories of immigration and we talk about, oh my gosh, this family has 5 doctors and there's an accountant and a lawyer, and we praise these success stories, that sometimes just making it across the border and working as a waiter is a success story, right? That when you are faced with these bandits and all of these people at every turn, just making it to Alex is a success story, you know? And for me, that's what I got from the book, that there was a call to humanity in reading this book, right? That makes you rethink your own politics and the own ways in which we, at a time when there's a massive sort of refugee crisis all over the world, right? And the ways in which refugees are being treated. Because we read like, oh, in Sweden, they're making them hand over their jewelry, but it seems distant, right? And right here in your backyard, you go to Spur and you're away to Zimbabwe and you don't even inquire about whether it's safe or not for them to go home to the township that you also live in, you know? So that's really just been what we took from the Gold Diggers. And it's, as Hlomani was saying, it's such an important book to write in humanizing ways about immigrants without having this very specific white gaze that panders to a certain audience, you know. So at the Cheeky Natives, we have a very special rating system, I'm sure you've heard. So at the Cheeky Natives, you don't give our authors popcorn and stars. You don't do that. So what we do is we give our authors land, right? I
think we should actually get T-shirts that say "Give them land." I think this is just give them land.
This is our job. This is our national project. So at the Land Committee, which is headed up by the very qualified Hlomani and I, we are here for you. We sat and we discussed, and what we do.
And what people don't know, guys, this is very serious business. I think people just think we wake up and we're like, let's give them
land.
No, we're like, okay, these sentences strung together like this book, these topics, like
You say how have you contributed? You know, is this book going to belong to the canon, or are we just gonna maybe let our children read it if they're bored? You know, yes. If you.
I just want to say thank you for explaining the land issue because I didn't understand it. You remember?
Yes, I do remember.
2 days ago. Thanks for clarifying.
So, obviously this is important. And the lovely Johannesburg features in the book. We can't obviously give you land from Zimbabwe because we don't own that land. So we're not going to start there. But we're going to give you land in Johannesburg. You write a lot about Hillbrow, but we're not going to give you that barren land. We're not going to give you that one. We want to give you rich, fertile land. We know that there's a suburb just before you get to Hillbrow. Houghton.
Oh, yeah.
So my sister, we're giving you Houghton.
So my sister, we are giving you Houghton. So when the land comes, right? Because there's a process. Now, if you become a problematic fave, we're going to take the land back.
We will do this announcement to be like, we've just realized we gave someone land who didn't need it.
Who is a problematic fave,
we will take it back.
In an act of reclamation, we'll take our land back. But when the land comes, because it will come, you can just come to us at the Cheeky Natives
and
come and collect your title deed from the Land Reclamation Office. And your land will be waiting for you. So just from the Cheeky Natives, we also want to say a very big thank you. We have a full audience on a cold Saturday morning.
Thank you.
And we can never ever underestimate just the amazing work that you guys do. And we just want to encourage people to buy books by Black authors. 10 years ago, we made this point, 10 years ago, we would never have imagined a book like Gold Diggers existing, right? A book set in Hillbrow, Berea, Alex, Houghton, and you can relate, right? These are not places that are far removed from you. You can relate. Hurlingham, we can relate to Hurlingham because it is ours. But it's that, and it speaks to the power of Black authors being given space. And the only way we can continue to give Black authors space is to support their work, right? So please don't ask authors for PDFs. Stop this thing, guys. Stop this. Don't let the devil use you on social media. Don't ask the author for PDFs. Don't. And there's a conversation about borrowing books as well that we must have, right? Because you'll find that we have all read The Gold Diggers, but it's because you read my copy, then I borrowed it to you, then you borrowed it to this person, then you borrowed it to that person. So yes, the book gets around, but it's not reaching the figures that it should, right? And it speaks to this idea that we're not valuing books in the way that we should. And there's writing as a craft, it's a process, and I hope that we're beginning to change the tide and realize people don't just wake up and be like, yes, like there's a craft that goes into it, and we need to value books for what they are. So please support Black authors. Please use the Cheeky Natives code CHEEKY at Bridge Books and get 10% off.
Because we love you, book lovers.
Because we love you, we're here for you. We can't give you land yet, but we can get you a discount on books.
Okay, so from us, the Cheeky Natives, thank you, Sue, so much for your very important book. We hope that people who are listening to the podcast will be able to buy the book. Again, one last time, The Gold Diggers by Sue Nyathi. So thank you very much for coming on our episode.
No, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for everyone who came through to listen to these cheeky people here.
So signing off, this is Hlomani signing off from the Cheeky Natives. Until next time.
Bye.